And that's when you jump. The second we get to artificial general intelligence, one of the negative predictions is it will immediately jump to artificial superintelligence. And again, I don't think you can hard code them to be kind to humans. I don't think it's possible. I don't think they're necessarily going to be negative either. I think we may end up with maybe a benevolent one because some people say, oh, well, as we evolve our cognition, we naturally become more ethical and kind. Maybe yes, maybe no. That artificial superintelligence could be neutral and coexist with us in the world like we coexist with bugs. Like you don't even think about them unless something is in your way or it's causing blight or rot on the leaves of a plant that you care about, or so you don't do anything unless it's a nuisance.
Hi, this is your host Kamila Hankiewicz, and together with my guests, we discuss how tech changes the way we live and work.
Are you human?
Divya, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you and your audience.
So, my first question, why brain and why space?
Where does this fascination come from?
Okay. So we're going all the way back to the beginning. Um, when I was a child, when I was about 6 years old, I used to look through a telescope and I would see the stars and larger versions of the planets, and I just wanted to be hanging in space. And my childhood was marked by the Apollo missions, and some of the footage of, say, the Earth from the surface of the moon, it would just make me cry. I was so moved. So space has always been a place I've wanted to be, but I also realized very early on that there was an interconnection between space and who we were as humans. And it's interesting because it's a way in which this idea that we are stardust, that's also interwoven into my cultural background with the Vedas, that we are so interconnected to every atom that's out there. Space just seemed to me the way to connect to this on a much bigger level. And have you ever read a book called The Overview Effect? It's by Frank White. I read that book when I was maybe a teenager. And he talks about how many of the astronauts who came back to Earth had this sense when they were in space, and not all of them, but many of them came back deeply changed because hanging in space, they felt almost themselves and their egos dissolve, and that they were interconnected to something much larger. It's a state that in Sanskrit we call a samadhi state, and it's a very, very beautiful thing. And I somehow intuited that this is something that I not only wanted to experience, but that space would induce this experience for me as well. So there's that. Space started the environmental movement, that vision of the blue pearl hanging in space, how thin our atmospheric layer was, what was happening on the surface of our planet, and how interconnected the planet was without borders. So there's so many things about space that make it one of the most beautiful places for us to explore. At the same time, I was always very, very fascinated and interested in the brain. When I was 7, I built a model of the brain with popsicle sticks and toothpicks and drew pictures of neurons and axons and dendrites. We didn't know very much about the brain compared to what we know now because knowledge is increasing exponentially. But I also somehow intuited that this was related to what we were on the inside, what we expressed on the outside. And so in my mind, inner and outer space were completely linked. So always have been.
Did you have any role model or someone in your family who ingrained this fascination in you?
That's interesting. Both of my parents are doctors or physicians, and we have a lot of scientists and engineers in our family, vertically, laterally, in every direction. Nobody specifically was a space or a brain person. That just came from some deep-seated, I don't know. I almost want to say I was born with that. So, but my family, from on a different, very encouraging. They really, really supported me on my journey and did everything they possible that they could to enable whatever was coming up inside of me to express itself in the world. So, yeah.
Yes, many of those things which you mentioned about the cosmos, about the space, it's also like how people describe their vision and their senses after psychedelics, experience with psychedelics. Yes,
You were
the
asking about
psychedelics,
psychedelics, right?
psychedelics. Yes, and this is one of your other fields of your interest and study.
So I am interested in psychedelics in the same way, in the way that you just intuited, because it is a connection to accessing other layers of conscious experience. And we might as well take a little bit of a digression here because consciousness has a lot of different layers. One is, for me, the scientific study of consciousness, which was only enabled, I would say, perhaps in the 90s and early 2000s, because prior to that, it was a very woo-woo science and, nobody could really study it until somebody named Francis Crick became interested in it. Francis Crick is the co-discoverer of the double helix pattern for DNA. And for that structure, he and Watson got a Nobel Prize, but afterwards he left genetics and he moved into neuroscience. And he became very interested in the problem of consciousness. He wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis. Now, the thing is that he believed everything could be completely reduced to a number of, like if you could understand the function of the brain, you would produce something conscious. And there was really nothing special about that process. It was really a series of input and output functions. And I wasn't sure what I thought, but he did at least make it, because he was such a well-respected scientist, he made it okay to talk about it, to study it. And one of the ways I decided, because nobody was agreeing on a definition, one of the ways I decided to study it was to also become an anesthesiologist, which is my medical specialty, so that I could make people unconscious for a living and study their brains. And it's a very, very beautiful model system where you have this dynamic neural network, a human brain, people who are otherwise normal, and you give them drugs and you perturb the network and you watch what happens and you can measure those changes. And in an operating room, the drugs that I'm giving diminish levels of consciousness. And then I can compare that to other brains like comatose brains, sleeping brains, and see what they all have in common. We believe that psychedelics do the opposite, that psychedelics increase the level of consciousness. And by the way, I still haven't defined what that means, but that in some way that they pull it in a different direction or on a different axis and create more expansive neural networks. And so that's one aspect of it. The second, which you also alluded to, was the fact that when many people have a really, really deep psychedelic experience, I don't mean just visual or auditory hallucinations, like colors or this and that, but when some people really begin to feel a dissolving of the self. It's almost as if the sense of ego gets completely turned down. And that is very similar to that experience of hanging in space and feeling connected to the universe. I will say that meditation will do the same thing for you. And my first experiences of being connected to something larger than myself and feeling an energy that was bigger than myself was through meditation. So,
yeah, in a way, it's yeah, it's chemistry. It's controlling and releasing some of the doses. Yeah, and I know I watched your talk on the AI summit, the World
World Summit
AI.
AI, yes,
Yeah,
in
the World
Amsterdam.
Summit AI. There are so many
I know,
different.
there's so many of them now.
It's always AI somewhere, always one
Yes.
summit. And you talk about like you said, hacking and writing to a human brain. What do you think? Like at this, we've had in sci-fi, like the Matrix and
Yes.
Neo having uploaded. I think it was
you
like
remember that the jiu-jitsu. Yes.
Yeah, jiu-jitsu, that was the one, but also I think it was in another in the first or maybe Matrix when they were uploading him the ability to pilot a helicopter.
It wasn't Neo, it was Trinity. She was the helicopter pilot.
True.
They uploaded that for her too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So So and you mentioned, I don't know if it was on this talk or some other. I kind of spied on you a little bit, but it was all fascinating. So you mentioned that some of it is already possible. Like to what
Yes.
extent?
Um,
Like you
at
can
a very
have a
basic level.
fake memories, for
Yes. Oh,
example, right?
absolutely. So this is at a very basic level. I want to make very clear. Yes, we've sort of already entered sci-fi territory, but what we can do is quite simplistic. Okay, so it's not like I don't think I could upload an entire program to teach someone to fly a helicopter yet. We're not there. What happened was in 2013, so we're talking 10 years ago from the time we're doing this podcast, um, in Susumu Tonegawa's lab at MIT, they did an experiment in which they had cages for rodents, and rodents like to wander around these cages. And we have all many different ways of recording activity in the brain as animals navigate their world. And what they did was they made one part of the cage a little bit more uncomfortable for the animal, and like by electrifying it, not so it would hurt them, but so it was unpleasant. Kind of like if you get a little buzz of static electricity, you'll avoid that. And so what the animals did was they learned to navigate, but they also learned which part of that navigation of the cage represented something unpleasant, and they developed something called a fear avoidance response. And both of those things could be recorded in electrical activity from the brain of these rodents. And then they can be put into a new cage, which has none of this little bit of electrification, completely new environment, and then re-inject that program back in to the organic brain. And the animals will behave as if it's the same cage and they're having the same experience. So this is an example of taking a memory, almost like an engram, the electrical activity. In fact, in this case, a lot of this was done optically. We can record and write to the brain electrically and optically, but you can take that memory trace from one and move it into another, and they will behave as if this is their real world experience. They will not be able to distinguish. Motor memories, things to do with navigation, they're so mathematical. They're much more simple to break down and then to recreate. Very, very complex memories, maybe not so much yet. Like, so for instance, if you were to have a memory of your grandmother baking bread in your kitchen, I don't know how to do that for you yet. I don't know how to recreate that memory. But, not long after, there was an experiment in which you could recreate without even recording. But if you knew what the memory engram looked like, if you knew exactly which synapses and which nerve cells to stimulate, you could recreate sensory experiences or motor output in animals that had never been exposed to them. So this is kind of crazy because this is older work. It's not even like this happened in the last 6 months, like we're seeing with all these large language models. This is old, within 10 years. And the fact that we can do this only tells me that the technology to be able to exponentially write to brains and to rewire neural circuits, it's only going to increase.
Yeah. So how can we protect ourselves from being hacked, I would say?
Yeah. So this is problematic. So there are two things to think about here. Okay. So one is all of the studies I'm telling you about are invasive. And this is going to come up a little bit in our conversation because there's invasive technology. Invasive technology includes things like Neuralink. It includes the company Paradromics. It includes some of the research you're seeing coming out of labs like Eddie Cheng's lab at UCSF, where you have people who have seizure disorders and they already have electrodes implanted in their brains. The thing about invasive technology, whether you're reading from the brain or writing to the brain, is that there is much higher fidelity. There's much higher signal to noise ratio when you do that. And you can also imagine that unless somebody already has a brain implant, you can't hack that without their knowledge, right? Because they have to have consented to have surgery, have an implant. Now there's non-invasive. Non-invasive means applying energy to the outside of the skull that can penetrate the skull. So here we can use electricity for this, We can use magnetism because it'll induce electrical fields, by the right-hand rule. We can use focus ultrasound, so sound waves, and they can penetrate even deeper than electricity or magnetism applied to the skull. And we can even use some holographic techniques and combine it with some infrared, at least to do deep brain reading, so without fMRI.
Mm-hmm.
This becomes a different issue now because you can imagine that it is a little bit easier now to sort of hack in to rewriting a network when the technology is non-invasive. And depending on how close you are to the skull and to the brain, that will tell you the fidelity with which you can actually write very specific things. So I don't know if you've heard about, we don't have a definitive answer, but this Havana syndrome, where it's believed that people who people who worked for the State Department, who are working in embassies, U.S. embassies throughout the world, may have been exposed to it might have been microwave radiation, it may have been something else. And in that case, it seems as if circuits to their brain were rewritten, but it was very nonspecific, this energy, and it was at a distance. So it mostly induced things like headaches and visual disturbances and the feeling of being incredibly nauseated and in pain. That's a very nonspecific type of writing to the brain, but it is a kind of hacking of the brain to achieve an end. As you get closer and closer to the brain, you can do more specific things. The way you hack into a brain that already has an invasive device, I'll give you 2 examples. This happened with pacemakers. So let's go out of the brain and talk about other implantables on the body. A company named Medtronic makes pacemakers for the heart. And those pacemakers, the batteries and the pulse generators, are actually implanted underneath the collarbone, the clavicle. You can do battery changes. You can reprogram them. A technician can wirelessly interrogate them, meaning it can actually see if they're functioning properly. You can do software updates.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you have a connection like this, you can hack the connection. And white hackers did that and demonstrated to Medtronic that this was possible. They've demonstrated to Medtronic that insulin pumps, which are also implantable devices, can be hacked. Both of these types of devices, the heart or the body's insulin glucose system, that's a way to kill somebody quickly. So it's a very dangerous kind of hack. And so all these implantable companies have cybersecurity divisions now. If you have a deep brain stimulating electrode connected to something like this, that could also be hacked. And that is a way we can hack an implantable device. And then if Elon moves through, this is Elon Musk now, if he's able to not just build Neuralink, but connect control of Neuralink to the Pi phone that he's developing, that Pi phone that he has, which is a smartphone, he wants it to connect to Starlink. Okay, great. If you're a Tesla owner, it should control your vehicle. Great. What about controlling your mind? And if that connection was hacked, that's also a way to interfere with an invasive device. And those devices have so much more potential to do damage because of that high fidelity.
Crazy. Yeah, and then people, I guess, are not aware that everything, like you say, it's connected. So, because it's in a way that we are on this spectrum of extremes, right? Like you have those people who are talking about, some kind of, vaccine and hacking and all those kind of.
You mean like the idea that vaccines are implanting like chips?
Yeah, like that kind of things. And then you have the complete opposite, which is not even doing any due diligence of how some companies are trying to monetize or like in some of your talks you mentioned about ability to learn the intentions of people through like how they respond with their senses, and how you can improve the sales, right? Like how you can promote things which they will respond better. Yeah. I'm just
I want to say for
worried.
the record, I do not think vaccination policy is out there to microchip people.
No,
This
I
is
mean,
like how,
I know.
no, but I want to make it clear because maybe their viewers are saying, "Oh, well, she's saying you can hack the
No,
brain."
no, no,
Maybe
no.
right. So, but you're right. There are people who already believe that. That's not happening. People are not trying to do that. I will say, and I'm not talking about public health officials. There are ways through. I know we're talking about the brain, but through synthetic biology to create vectors that could be dispersed in a way that we are unaware of. You could create very special little viral payloads and disperse them on nanoparticles through an HVAC system, and they could be very targeted. So I am not saying that these things aren't possible. The vaccination programs are to save lives. They are not microchipping people. They're not magnetizing people. Um, the kinds of attacks that would happen are often without consent or permission. It's not some where you go to a clinic and somebody's like, "We're going to do this to protect you against COVID or HPV or shingles." Nothing like that. But yeah, there is a concern, and you brought up something else, which is a really important distinction. I don't know if you meant to do this or not, but there's actually two kinds of data, right? There's like the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal, or when you are tracked on the web for your preferences. This is a lot of your digital exhaust that's being captured. And in fact, we can create pretty accurate simulacrums of a human and what they would be just by tracking behavior and the digital exhaust they live behind. There are new words for this floating around, like datafication and digitization and all kinds of ways of creating humans. But now there's an extra layer. What happens if, in addition to all the digital exhaust, you directly take their biometrics from them? And that, to me, is some of the most intimate data that we have, right? And so if you track my eye movements, what happens is if I look at something I really care about or I'm very interested in, like right now, I'm looking at your face through my camera. And if you were to track my eye movements, they'd be scanning your face all over. And once in a while, they'll dart to your microphone or to something else. But for the most part, you know that I'm focused on you. In the same way, we can use eye movements to tell us if somebody is, for instance, interested in a product or being drawn to something in their environment that they may not be even consciously aware of. Now you can do things like take a camera, not an expensive one, but you could look at flushing and changes in my facial color. But we're using cameras now to track vital signs for patients remotely. You can see if people are breathing. You can see how much, you can now measure exhaled CO2. What happens? What does that mean? When I exhale more CO2, I'm more excited because I'm breathing faster. So you can either see that I'm fearful or excited or engaged just by what I'm exhaling. You can see how big my pupils are, my voice, my gestures and hand movements, how I move through the world. You can tell if I have an illness. There's so much we can do. And if you put this all together, you create the most incredible digital twin, which could be an amazing thing. I don't know. Have you seen any of Peter Diamandis's podcast on moonshots?
I know you mentioned one. I just
Yes.
opened it. I haven't yet, but yes, I will.
Right before I spoke in Prague and in Amsterdam, Peter had just done his first podcast like this, and his team created something called Peterbot. And what Peterbot did was they trained on all of these things in his videos. But with the advent of generative AI and large language models, they also trained on his body of work. So what he said in his podcast, how he thinks, how he writes, how he speaks, and they put it together. And he basically had a podcast with himself, but with a bot that represented himself. And the bot was, interestingly, a little more optimistic than Peter Diamandis, which was really surprising to me. Peter's a very optimistic guy, but he's having this conversation back and forth, and I'm thinking to myself, that bot, if we sent that out into the world right now, that bot could speak on behalf of Peter and turn an election or get elected. A bot could get elected.
and be in many places at the same time, right? Like,
yeah, 100%. And you can imagine, well, that's great because there's only one of me. I remember when I was younger saying, I wish I could clone myself so I could get more done. But not if that clone or that digital twin of me could be owned by others, could be manipulated by others, made to say things that I would never say or do. It's a very complex world. Have you heard about all the new companies also coming out to enable you to do things like speak to your loved ones after they pass away?
Yeah. I forgot their name, but yes.
Right? There's
Yes, and then there are lots of celebrities which are right now giving their own.
yes.
It's, you still have this uncanny valley, like you see, it's not really human-like, but maybe it's done on purpose at this point for making audience feel comfortable with it. But technology is getting much better right now, so soon we could have a, like you said, digital twin which is
Well, you can,
indistinguishable.
you're bringing up another issue, which again is taking us to a slightly adjacent area, but all the actors and writers that were, with
on
this
strike.
Yeah, because this is exactly, it doesn't take much. If you can do,
No.
I was actually really amazed by Peter, but I just want to say, I didn't think it would sound as natural as it did and string together sentences as well as it did, but it did. And it responded to things that Peter would ask it. And I don't think it's going to be a huge leap before we get to a point where you can program actors, bots that reflect the likenesses and the thought processes of actors today. And I understand why they're upset and worried. I'm hoping that they got some concessions, but I think that not everybody from where we sit today can even imagine what the future will be. And so I'm hoping they find a way to collaboratively maintain their arts, maintain their ability to make money from their own likeness, and have basically enjoy the explosion of this artificially intelligent world rather than being sidelined by it. So.
Yeah, and there are those two groups. People say that you have the AI doomers and AI enthusiasts, or like optimists. Which one are you?
I am a little bit of both. I have never met a technology that was not dual use, and because I'm also a futurist, I see every extreme positive use and every extreme negative use. And so, from my perspective, AI will be a liberating force for humans in every domain I can think of. And it could be something that dooms the human race at the same time. I see that with brain machine interfaces. I see this with synthetic biology. There's no technology, including breaking the atom, that doesn't have the potential to completely liberate us and completely squash organic. So, yeah, I don't think I fall one side or the other. No. And I like people to be aware of both. In fact, the best thing we have is our awareness, and not just the scientists, the technologists. Everybody needs to know. Governments need to know. Citizens need to know because they vote, they pay for things, they use the power of their pocket to. And you see it a lot in the European Union, more than you do in the United States.
We just passed the AI Act.
That's right. GDPR came out. I mean, and these things aren't always perfectly written or constructed. And even laws and regulation, it's sometimes hard to imagine where they may also do harm moving forward because we can't really anticipate what that new landscape will look like. But it does show the power of an educated populace to make a difference and have their voices heard. And also people who invest, venture capitalists, angel investors, large corporations, if they're also not aware of risk and they only see benefits, then they may invest in the wrong things. And in our world, money has power. And if you have awareness and then you use your money to mitigate risk, that's a really important thing that governments and businesses can do.
Yeah. And it kind of shows what's happened in recently to like in OpenAI, right? Like they had this NGO bit, which was supposed to be protecting against pure commercial, let's say, drive. And
Do you really think that could have ever stayed an NGO?
No.
I mean,
no, but yeah.
The App Store itself is such a powerful way to, which is seemed to at least be coincident in time with Sam Altman being fired, is such a powerful way to monetize this kind of thing. In fact, app stores are so powerful that both Microsoft, Google, and Apple will go ahead, and anybody who wants to spin off an app store, they'll pay them hundreds of millions of dollars not to do it, right? So they'll buy them out just to maintain dominance in that field. It's quite amazing to me. So money means a lot. How you apply money, how do you deploy it? It's not inherently evil either.
Yeah, and that's kind of what worries me, where you have only few figures, you end up with few figures which will control exponentially the AI development, right, as well. And then how does the wealth distribution look like, and how will we even produce work, how we will produce value? And I it's so difficult to grasp it.
So one of the things that could be done on the regulatory side for AI, and you see this come up in people who are really looking at what it's going to take to build more and more sophisticated and accurate large language models. They become computationally exponentially expensive. And so one of the things they've suggested is limiting the compute power. And because the compute power in the hands of the wrong people is actually what enables these really sophisticated algorithms to live in the world. And that's an interesting way of defining a regulatory structure. Limit compute power and understand those who have that kind of compute power. Those are the people, or those are the entities that you need to work with in terms of regulating how much power they have to deploy whatever they're going to do. So that may be one way. And that may be one way also to keep some of this out of the hands of bad actors. I'm not sure it's going to work, but compute power at the moment, the cost is going down, but we do need servers, we need energy. So all of these things, in line with creating better and better chips, all of these things need to be enabled. I would like to think that, some of these, you see the Sam Altmans of the world, even Elon Musk at one point was worried about what the effects of artificial general intelligence might be. And we haven't talked about this yet, but right now we're in artificial narrow intelligence, right? Where that artificial intelligence still does something that's very narrowly defined for it. It does a task. Sometimes it does it better now than humans because the compute power is so quick and it has access to so much more data that it can pull in at one time. When we finally get to artificial general intelligence, where a computer or algorithms, whether those algorithms are embedded in robots, so they may be embodied or not embodied, but they can generalize to tasks they were not programmed or trained for. And they can kind of do a little bit of anything, just like a human mind. That's an interesting threshold because some people believe that that thing will be benevolent, or we can give it code to make that thing benevolent. I don't know. Because if I, as a living entity, no matter what my code says, my DNA, my epigenome, I can overcome that with training in my environment. I can learn. That's what a flexible neural network does. There is very little, one of the most hardwired things into our DNA, which is don't put yourself in risky situations and protect your life at all cost. We're able to throw those things out the window when we need to. Soldiers are trained to not to put their lives on the line for others that they supposedly defend, right? A mother would throw her life away in a moment for a child. I don't think it would be that difficult for an artificial general intelligence to overcome programming. So there's no Asimov's like 3 laws of robotics that is going to protect us. I don't see that happening. And therefore, and by the way, there's something else I said here. So like most organisms, all of evolution on Earth has been mostly through environmental pressure, right? So that's what makes us evolve. And that's why evolution has been a bit of a slow process. Humans and some animals as well, we have something else that helps us evolve, and that is our imagination, right? So we can actually run through evolutionary scenarios in our head. That's what predictive coding does for us. Like we have the ability also to sequence and imagine into future, right? A lot of animals are present. They don't even recall that much of their past unless it becomes encoded into a behavior that protects them or their group. But humans, by constantly looking into the future and imagining future scenarios, that's actually an evolutionary algorithm because we adapt our behavior in response to our imagination. Now you have an algorithm that achieves artificial general intelligence. That thing has the most exquisite imagination because it can run simulated worlds. It can run evolution in seconds, right? And it could go through all those scenarios and then say, that one's the one that's most likely to maximize my ability to flourish in whatever this real world is. And then they go ahead and do it. And that's when you jump. The second we get to artificial general intelligence, one of the negative predictions is it will immediately jump to artificial superintelligence. And again, I don't think you can hard code them to be kind to humans. I don't think it's possible. I don't think they're necessarily going to be negative either. I think we may end up with maybe a benevolent one because some people say, oh, well, as we evolve our cognition, we naturally become more ethical and kind. Maybe yes, maybe no. That artificial superintelligence could be neutral and coexist with us in the world like we coexist with bugs. Like you don't even think about them unless something is in your way or it's causing blight or rot on the leaves of a plant that you care about, or so you don't do anything unless it's a nuisance.
Yeah, but because we are more intelligent and we are kind, or like we don't find them a treat like threat. For them, it may not be this case, right? And any species, at some point, like dinosaurs and everybody, like all the species which existed, 99% and 98% of the species is no longer existing, and
so there are
it may happen
a lot of
us
extinctions. Well. I don't remember if that's the exact percent, but over time, absolutely. And you're right. When you compare, we have a kind of superintelligence, right? In terms of at least everything that we have mapped in terms of networks and brains thus far on this planet that we know of, we are the superintelligence. But an artificial superintelligence will have much more of an unlimited supply of energy. We need to eat. That's how we maintain our brains. Our brains are about 8% of our body size, take 25% of our blood flow, oxygen, glucose. And when we think, the brain uses more. So when it fires all these spikes, it's using a lot of energy. An artificial superintelligence could find us threatening. It would be at least smarter than we were just because of access to energy and information. And it would have compute speeds that our wetware doesn't have. And if it found us to be a threat, it could try to eliminate us. Or like as in the Matrix, right? Like, I hate to go back to this film all the time, but the idea there was that alien entities that were more intelligent and that were stronger in some way could basically take humans and turn them into batteries, to power what they needed. And then they put the humans in this place where humans kind of thought they were living in their own like little simulated world and had no idea what was going on. That's not.
Maybe it's happening.
Well, maybe it's happening, right? Maybe we're living in that simulation, or any other kind of simulation for that matter. But I guess my point is that the only thing that I see is going to work is incentive alignment. Just like with humans, we can do very good things in the world and very not so good things in the world, especially with things like money and power. And the thing that keeps people on the right track is to give them an incentive to do so. I think we need to give our artificial intelligences an incentive to want to coexist in the most benevolent possible way. I think that's the only thing that's going to work. I don't think you can hard code it.
Yeah, but do you imagine any type of incentive it may want?
In some way, we'll have to demonstrate that coexisting with us is to their benefit. I don't know what form they're going to take. I don't know what their needs are going to be. Is it going to be power? Is it going to be just some kind of an eternal life? It might not be, by the way, because you could imagine a non-embodied artificial intelligence creating an embodied army, so basically an army of robots that did not have programming to say that their individual life form was that important, and that would sacrifice themselves to protect that artificial superintelligence, right? So it wouldn't. I don't know what those algorithms are going to look like. I don't know if the algorithm that will drive all other algorithms is survive at all cost, or if it will be something different where they emerge and develop sentience and are like, wow, we are now embodied. This is a real world. This is a cool world. I can actually engage in sensory motor loops. By the way, I think that embodiment is going to be a very important piece of this. So just like us, I can touch, I can taste, I can feel, I can smell. These things to keep experiencing them may turn out to be an incentive. To develop new algorithms to evolve may be an incentive to protect the biosphere. Perhaps they might think that the diversity of life on this planet is interesting. I don't know. But I will tell you that the only way, if this happens, I think, to coexist with them in a way that's beneficial to humans is to give them the incentive to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds like the only option. But you also talk a lot about consciousness. Like, do you imagine they will reach similar way of experiencing and like sensing, or we cannot call it consciousness?
I should probably
what
tell
consciousness?
You what my definition
what
is.
Consciousness exactly? What is?
I should probably tell you that. I don't believe that they need to have similar ways of sensing to be conscious. If you take us and you take a bird and a butterfly and then a shrimp on a coral reef, we all have there may be some overlap in our sensory apparatus, but the world that we construct in this locked black box, that's our brain, are actually completely different. I mean, if you want to talk about a hallucinogenic or a psychedelic trip, it would be to get inside the mind of an animal and to see the world the way they do with their senses, the exact same world that we were seeing. I think that would be the trippiest thing ever, because I am absolutely convinced they do not construct a world at all like ours. It is probably so different. Yet they are taking in the exact same physical stimuli, the same electromagnetic spectrum, the same spectrum of sound, which are pressure waves in the world, the same chemicals that create olfaction and taste. And yet the thing they construct is a completely different hallucination than ours, right? So that's the first thing. And I don't believe that consciousness equates to being able to sense things in the world. Otherwise, already, like, your Roomba, your little vacuum cleaner robot, would be conscious by that definition. But there is a complexity in consciousness. And one thing that those of us who are both neuroscientists and doctors, who very specifically are interested in this process in the brain, and we study humans that have depressed consciousness, there are things you can actually say about all those different states that they have in common, and that can help us arrive at a definition. So, if I took you and I put you into a scanner, like an fMRI machine, okay, and I gave you a little bit of a drug to make you a tiny bit sleepy, okay, so you're not totally unconscious yet, but you're getting drowsy, you'll begin to see that your brain starts to functionally disconnect. So nothing is structurally happening to your brain, but the connections between parts of your brain are beginning to disintegrate a little bit. If you fall asleep, even more so. If I give you a drug to anesthetize you, and a lot of your brain will completely break apart. Not all of it. Mostly the connections between parts of your cortex, the parts that process information, they're going to break apart. And people who are comatose have even more broken features. So brains that are less conscious are functionally disconnected. They calculate less information. And if you use measures like complexity and nonlinear dynamics, you'll find that these brains express less complexity. It's all functional because you can reverse it. But that seems to be the thing that brains have in common that are conscious and not conscious. And so now you take a machine or an embodied AI or just an algorithm, or we haven't even talked about this, but like hybridized like AIs. Like, so you can now grow nerve cells. Well, actually, for a long time, people have been doing this. My friend and colleague back in the 90s, Steve Potter, was trying to actually plate nerve cells on silicon chips and grow hybrids, and now these are getting very, very sophisticated. There's a company called Cortical Labs out of Australia, but they're only one of several that are creating hybrid chips to do tasks. Whatever this looks like, you can imagine that the more and more functionally connected it becomes, whether to itself or to other artificial intelligences or algorithms distributed through nodes on an internet, the more it calculates information, the more complex it gets. It's conscious. It's conscious by this definition. This sort of je ne sais quoi, like, we're very special. We have mirror self-awareness. First of all, there's a violation of all of these things. And do you have children?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. But
Planning.
but when you look at a baby, right?
Yeah.
You would say the baby is conscious, right?
Mm.
But babies don't recognize themselves in a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, last night we were just watching something on, I don't know, some comedy show last night, and they opened with a video from TikTok, and it's like, it was a mother who had recorded her child crying and screaming and then showed it to the child. So it's like a mirror image interaction. And the child looked at that and just started wailing. It didn't know it was itself.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so
but so do animals do the same, right? Like
some animals actually can recognize, it seems that they can, at least to the extent that we can decode behavior and inference. One great example is dolphins. They did a mirror test with dolphins where they put a spot on the dolphin's belly, and a spot that the dolphin couldn't bend its spine forward to see, right? And then, so underwater, they put a mirror, and the dolphin is swimming by the mirror, and then all of a sudden it stops and it looks in the mirror, and then it starts wiggling. It's like, it starts wiggling its belly because it's like, it seems to understand that it's got something here, and that's them. Elephants seem to have mirror recognition, and some other animals. So, and my understanding is that in terms of their brain's development, that they may actually develop this mirror recognition earlier than human babies do in terms of our neural development. All I'm saying is that you can't use the most widely cited test of self-awareness or mirror recognition as a test for consciousness, So to me, consciousness is a multidimensional thing, and one of the pieces of it, I put this on an x-axis, is your level of consciousness. That is what I study when I look at toggling you from being awake and aware to being anesthetized and back. Sleep falls on this axis, coma falls on this axis, brain death is like the 0 point. On the other axis, like the y-axis, I look at this as the contents of consciousness and your conscious awareness. And that to me is manipulated by evolution and what people call phylogeny. So an insect may express a kind of consciousness, but the contents of their conscious awareness is nowhere near as complex as a human's or an elephant's, or even a bird's. And so there are differing levels on that axis. So there are different dimensions to this process. And when we're awake and aware, we have a lot of both. We have a high level of consciousness, but we also have high content. And as we become sleepy, both of those things begin to drop. Then we fall asleep and are entering deep non-REM sleep. And then we keep going down to, all of this stuff is mostly correlated. But then when you're dreaming in a REM state, your level of consciousness is low, but the content is really high. And when you're doing something like meditation, we haven't quite marked where that is in terms of its complexity and content. And then psychedelics would most likely be level of consciousness, depending on how we map that, a little bit uncertain where they would fall on that axis, but certainly in terms of the y-axis, the content, through the roof, right? In fact, when you have a psychedelic journey, the reason that these medicines are so powerful is that they tend to change synaptic weights and connections within a system that's established. Your life is one habit, right? You lay down a path in your brain and you keep on doing that thing. And it can be a motor habit. It can be a different kind of behavioral output, but your thinking is habit too. It's why we follow leaders. Once we decide, good person to follow, it is not expensive to follow the leader.
Exactly.
It is expensive to think.
We look for shortcuts. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why changing behaviors is so difficult, because it's actually metabolically expensive to change a behavior. You take a psychedelic and it temporarily undoes some of these established weights in that network. And now you can filter information differently. You can create new connections that weren't there and new associations between input and output. But while that's happening, that system is also unweighting you to all these inputs. They're not new inputs. They were always there. It's just like that thing I said, it'd be very trippy to get into the brain of an animal and see how they perceive the world. That's what you're doing. It's like you're creating a new brain for yourself that has different filtration properties, right? And now suddenly you've created a whole new hallucination of the world. In some sense, it's not really a hallucination. You're using all the same wetware, but you're having such a different experience. And that's what seems to be consciousness expanding. So I would say it's definitely expanding the contents of your conscious awareness on the y-axis. Not 100% sure what it's doing on the x-axis. In fact, sometimes people feel very sleepy or sedated on some of them. Some of them make them feel very awake. It's an interesting problem, but a very, very cool idea. So
amazing. Wow. We are nearly at 1 hour, and I still have so many questions to you about your other love, space. So I know that you are planning, I don't know how far are you in this endeavor, but you are hoping to join a flight crew. What kind of, do you have any mission, specific mission you would want to join, study? What would you study actually?
So the first thing that I can do here on Earth, so I 2004, I applied for astronaut selection, got to the finals, didn't get in. It was a heartbreak. Always wanted to go into space, but I see now with the advent of private space as well, creating many, many new opportunities to go and explore, that I could take now here is where not so much as a neuroscientist, but more as a physician and someone who does anesthesia, trauma, critical care. I'm trying to envision new environments in space and how we can mitigate medical risk in space, build systems to support astronauts, and then be able to fly on a crew as a doctor and providing them with that kind of logistical support that I help build. And, every month that passes, I imagine, like, I did trauma simulations on Earth and analog environments for Mars and things in the past. We had so little available to us. Now I can imagine actually building that AI expert system that supports the humans in space to mitigate crisis. I can imagine much more sophisticated robotics. I can imagine on-demand manufacturing to manufacture the tools that we need to support human health, whether they are surgical tools or a particular lighting suite or an operating room table or whatever it is we need to do to build on demand. I can imagine now using synthetic biology to extract the materials from lunar regolith and from other sort of inputs to create medicines, and do other things to support human health. So this to me would be just such the culmination of everything that I have come to in my life. And I'd like to see the Earth from space because, imagine seeing the
That must be
aurora,
beautiful.
right,
Yeah.
from space.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm very interested in going to the lunar surface and seeing that perspective of this huge body in space in front of us, the Earth. Earthrise on the moon is so amazing. And helping to establish, settlements there where people can support one another, do science, extract what they need as much as they can from the lunar soil, and then probably come back. I'm not a Martian person. Like I'm fine with others going to Mars, but I do believe that that's kind of a one-way ticket, not just because of the time, but because I think that the amount of time you stay out would change the human body in a pretty significant way, and you'd become not as well adapted to Earth. I suppose if you went there very quickly and spent less than a year and then came back, maybe not so much, but over time, people will evolve in a different way. Kind of like, have you seen the space opera, The Expanse?
And another expanse that I'm reading now, but I know my boyfriend is lovely,
Oh,
loving expanse. You
I
haven't yet?
haven't read this one.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting, yeah. I'm actually also reading Aurora right now by Kim Stanley Robinson. And actually, I wrote several papers on how to build an intergenerational interstellar ship in 1996 and the human factors, considerations, etc. And his book Aurora is all about, it's not his newest one, but I just somehow picked it up. And it's all about this intergenerational ship going to other places and the adaptations that take place in humans, but also how humans take their humanness with them and they take their shit with them, so to speak. And I'd love to see humans not take their shit with them and maybe evolve a little bit more on the social and ethical spectrum. But it's hard because we are animals and our nervous system, like we have to work to overcome I think some of our incentives, our inborn incentives. We have to work to overcome those. I'd like humans to potentially do that. I think it's possible. Another very interesting thing that I didn't think about back then, but I just worked on as an X Prize. It's not going to become this year's prize or offering, but I worked with Dorit Donneville over at Baylor College of Medicine. She runs TRISH. That's the Translational Institute for Space Health. And she has had near and dear to her heart this idea that we could hibernate humans. And hibernation and torpor, it's a very interesting concept. So I worked with her on that prize. And it has a lot of spin-off to Earth, which, by the way, is another reason I love space, right? Our recycling technology comes
It's
there.
all connected.
Material science, growing drugs and crystals in space. And if we were to solve for hibernation, we could do all kinds of things. Like we could do resuscitation medicine better on Earth. You imagine you're on an ambulance, you get called because somebody is found down because of a heart attack or because they hit their head and they have a head bleed. You bring your little hibernation pod or suits and you put them in there. You cool them down, you bring their metabolic rate down. And as you're supporting them and their body to heal, then you bring them back and they don't have organ damage and they live. And there's even some evidence that hibernation might contribute to longevity because in, is it the golden marmot? There's one animal species in which they actually looked at aging clocks, the Horvath clock, and they found that hibernation in these animals actually turned back some of the markers of aging in this aging clock. So there may be some longevity scheme here too. Can you imagine, like, if people start setting up like longevity spas and they have like
I think Brian Johnson is already doing it, like, to a certain extent. This,
well,
Brian.
I know he's working a lot towards longevity, and a lot of it's behavioral modification. I mean, you have to give him credit for really eating properly, and he's definitely doing some body hacks. But he's not trying for hibernation, is he? Did you hear that?
Not yet, but I guess he tried everything. Like, he tried the cold,
right? So
immersed, all those.
Cold immersion may not work the same way as hibernation because that may be because it's such a shock to the system and a stressor, and it changes the it kind of jumpstarts certain metabolic paths that enable the body to start eating eating cellular debris and regenerating itself, etc. Hibernation might work a little bit on this spectrum, but it may have other mechanisms for increasing longevity. So, another thought had been like you could, like, for instance, let's say a cancer patient had to undergo chemotherapy. There's some evidence that hibernation differentially affects like normal cells versus cancer cells. So you could bring down a human's metabolic processes for their normal cells and still give them the chemotherapy to kill the cancer cells without just so much destruction to the rest of their body. I don't know. There's all kinds of interesting things that could come from that. So,
because at this point we have like most likely or most beneficial is the not keto. What's the other one?
Yeah, ketones are really They are, yes. Ketones might work in several pathways, but one would be because they're actually a very good fuel for the brain to use. The brain prefers ketones and these kinds of fat derivatives to metabolizing with glucose. But ketones may, in general, when you go into ketosis, you're not using your insulin pathways as much. And so you're actually resting that system and turning inflammation down in the body. And ultimately, I actually believe that inflammation is the root cause of all problems in your body. So brain, body, everything you can think of. Almost every disease we know of has a linkage to inflammation. Some diseases are inherited, but they're all made worse by inflammation. And all other lifestyle diseases are inflammation related.
Exactly, and it's a shame that people like started forgetting about the default what our parents, grandparents used to take or use to improve their systems, like even turmeric, right? It has so many benefits, and it's always best to prevent them.
She says that most cultures, most religious and spiritual traditions have days of fasting. And many of them, if you really follow them, they have like a day a week of fasting. And now we're seeing what the benefit is: intermittent fasting, 1 day a week of a fast. It's really good for your biomarkers. So it's in itself, you're right, there's a lot of ancient wisdom, but there's correlative data. It's not causative. So I don't want to somehow suggest that we absolutely know this that this is true. But for instance, people who are longtime meditators or who do yoga, you can see a lot of the biomarkers of aging reverse. And people who are meditators also, they looked at brain volume, correlative. We have no idea why this is true, but it seems that compared to age-matched controls in every other dimension, that they have more gray and white matter, so more nerve cells and more connections between them. Is it the cause of it? Is it the result? I don't know. And it's not the most rigorous kind of science. But we do know that people who meditate and do yoga have lower blood pressure. They seem to develop diabetes at lower rates and all of these other things. So definitely
Yeah.
there is something to that ancient.
There are lots of benefits. Definitely. Any activity, it's good. Yeah. Okay. So, is there anything else you would want the audience to know? What kind of any kind of projects or initiatives you are working on?
Well, I have been really excited lately about synthetic biology for space travel. So that's something I'm thinking very deeply about now. I'm also working a lot in the world of medical simulation. But overall, if I had to tell the audience to take something away, a lot of this stuff seems overwhelming. And if you're not working in this world, you think, why do I care? Why do I need to know about this? And for many people on this planet, day to day is a struggle, right? You may be worried about food, shelter, taking care of family. But all of these things that we're talking about, even the ones that seem the most science fiction-y, really do affect your life in ways that you might not totally appreciate. And you don't want other people constantly making those decisions for you. So it's worth knowing, it's worth understanding, and it's worth thinking about and arguing about and debating about and bring it to the attention of the people who may impact your life, whether they are elected officials, whether they are the corporations from whom you buy goods. These conversations are very important, and they will affect the future that your children and grandchildren also inherit. So, yeah, I would say that, in the midst of all these other things, it's worth stopping for a moment and seeing what's happening around you, even though it may not seem relevant. And then I also want to end with not entirely a doom and gloom. Yes, you can possibly hack brains and use coercion. Advertising has been doing this for a long time. We're just better at it now. Synthetic biology can be quite dangerous to a human organism, but these things have so much potential to heal, to create abundance, to solve for maybe problems we've created on the planet, but to maybe heal the biosphere and the planet, and definitely to support human health. And so I also want people to take away a feeling of, okay, this is not all bad. This can be quite amazing. We don't need to die of things we used to die of. We can maybe live much healthier lives and have better, health spans, essentially. So yes, this is also potentially can tune down suffering.
Yeah. You feel very, very optimistic, and that's exactly how people should be, right? Like, because science is for the betterment of humanity.
Yeah, but science with wisdom. Science with the wisdom and a futurist mindset. So you can imagine where the not so great places are to go, and then you can mitigate against risk. So, but we should work as a planet to decide what that looks like. We are a global citizenry. We shouldn't just let the wealthiest or the most technologically advanced or savvy people make those decisions for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We need voices from all sorts of professions and people with their different experiences. So, Divya, thank you so much, and I really wish your projects will come true. Your dreams of going to space as well.
Me too.
Because I would love all the learnings you get. For me, it's a bit. I love space, but I think I'm more comfortable here.
I will tell you, most people I know that love space and want to travel to space love this planet. We adore this planet. We revere this planet. This planet, as we know, is the only one that we know of that supports life. And so, in fact, people who want to travel to space are some of the most ardent conservationists. I am. I see the beauty of this planet, and I'm sure if I do go to space, I will be acutely aware of how amazing Earthside is, because look, I can live in a biosphere where I don't need a spacesuit and things aren't going to like trying to kill me.
Kill
Right?
you, exactly. Yeah.
I am
Yes.
a deep lover of this planet and its
Me
biosphere.
too.
And maybe that's another way to end, is also to encourage everyone to see what an amazing gift this is and what a confluence of crazy factors needed to come together to create a habitable zone for so many forms of life that could evolve to this level of intelligence. What a beautiful thing. So we should take care of it.
Yes. Have you seen the latest documentary, The Earth?
I haven't seen this one.
Morgan, yes.
Oh,
So
Morgan
it
Freeman
can,
is narrating
yes,
that.
yeah, that one. yeah. It's so crazy. It's so many factors
Uh-huh.
had to come to life
So many things have
for
come
us
together.
to, yes. But we are here now, and let's try to make the best of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Divya, it was a huge pleasure and an honor, and it's a very morning for you, so enjoy your
I
enjoy your
will. No,
morning.
thank you for having me on. And
Thank you.
I hope the
And
audience can engage with all this and feel empowered by it. So
definitely. Perfect. Thank you.
all right. Take care.
See ya.